When most people picture a medieval knight, they imagine a warrior in shining armor riding off on noble quests, slaying dragons, and rescuing maidens. The reality was far less romantic. Most knights spent their days doing something that would surprise modern audiences: paperwork, estate management, and settling disputes between farmers. Let's walk through an actual day in the life of a 14th century knight to see what this life really looked like. The day begins around 4 or 5 in the morning, not by choice, but because the stone chamber is freezing and the straw mattress has become unbearably uncomfortable. It's late October 1320 in northern France. Despite living in his own castle, an ancestral home that signals elevated status, the building offers little comfort. Stone walls keep the structure standing, but they do almost nothing to keep warmth in. The morning routine starts with a trip to the privy, a small room with a wooden seat positioned over a hole that drops straight down into the moat below. This wasn't just his castle's solution. This was standard medieval plumbing for the upper classes. The smell alone was enough to fully wake anyone up. Getting dressed meant layers: a linen shirt against the skin, woolen hose, and a practical tunic. The elaborate silks and velvets that knights wore to formal occasions stayed packed away in chests. Daily life required clothing that could handle dirt, sweat, and physical labor. A knight's wardrobe was split between status symbols and work clothes, and most days called for the latter. By the time our knight reached the Great Hall, servants had already lit the morning fires. Breakfast was simple: bread, cheese, cold meat from the previous night's supper, and ale. The ale requires explanation. Medieval water sources were often contaminated, making ale, usually weak, low-alcohol ale, the safer option. Knights drank ale for breakfast not because they were alcoholics, but because it was less likely to make them sick than well water. While eating, the knight's steward would arrive with the day's problems: a miller disputing his tax assessment, 3 families behind on rent payments, a bridge needing repairs before winter, reports of bandits on the main road. This administrative work formed the bulk of a knight's actual responsibilities. He was essentially a middle manager in the feudal system, responsible for keeping his lord's estate profitable and his peasants productive. Each problem required a decision: lower the taxes slightly to keep the miller working, grant the families an extension on their rent, send armed men to patrol the roads, delay the bridge repairs because there wasn't enough money or manpower to handle everything at once. These weren't dramatic choices, but they were constant, and getting them wrong could mean economic disaster for the estate or complaints to his own lord. After breakfast came physical training, typically lasting about an hour. This wasn't optional. Knights were expected to maintain combat readiness throughout their lives, even as their bodies aged and accumulated injuries. A knight in his late 30s would likely be dealing with old wounds, shoulder injuries from lance impacts, knee problems from years of riding in full armor, maybe broken bones that had healed poorly. The training partner was usually a squire, a teenage boy serving the knight as part of his own path toward knighthood. The squire needed to learn, and the knight needed to stay sharp. Sword drills, practice with various weapons, and physical conditioning made up the session. This was sweaty, painful work, especially in cold weather when muscles were stiff and old injuries flared up. Following training came armor maintenance. A full suit of plate armor, common by the 15th century, weighed around 50 pounds and cost roughly a quarter of a knight's annual income. Every piece required regular inspection for rust, loose rivets, and worn leather straps. Rust could weaken metal to the point of failure, and in battle, equipment failure meant death. The maintenance was tedious but absolutely necessary. Mid-morning meant riding out to inspect the lands. This is where Hollywood gets it especially wrong. Knights owned war horses, powerful, expensive, battle-trained animals called destriers, but they didn't ride them for daily errands. War horses were like luxury sports cars. You kept them for special occasions because they cost a fortune and required expert handling. For regular patrols, knights rode ordinary horses, the medieval equivalent of a work truck. Riding through the village, the knight would observe daily life. Blacksmiths at their forges, bakers working ovens, women hauling water from communal wells. Villagers would bow or simply stop and stare. The relationship between knights and peasants wasn't built on affection. It was built on power and mutual dependence. The knight provided military protection and justice. The peasants provided labor and a portion of their harvest. Neither side loved the arrangement, but it was the system they had. During these patrols, knights often dealt with security threats. Bandits were a genuine problem in medieval Europe. Tracking them, however, required caution. A knight with 2 guards encountering evidence of 5 or more bandits faced a choice: charge in and risk an ambush, or retreat and return with reinforcements. Experience usually taught knights to choose the latter. The heroic charge might make for good stories, but it got people killed. Returning to the castle meant spending the afternoon acting as a judge. Knights held manorial courts where they settled disputes among their tenants. A farmer claimed his neighbor's pigs destroyed his crops. 2 brothers argued over their deceased father's property. A woman accused a merchant of fraud. Each case required listening to both sides, asking questions, and rendering a judgment. This wasn't ceremonial. These decisions affected people's lives and livelihoods. A wrong judgment could spark feuds that lasted generations. Knights weren't trained lawyers. They relied on local custom, common sense, and whatever wisdom they'd accumulated over the years. Half the people walked away dissatisfied, no matter what the knight decided, but the system required someone to make these calls, and that responsibility fell to the local lord. Evening meals in a knight's household were communal affairs held in the Great Hall. The knight, his wife, household members, and any guests ate together. The food was substantial: roasted meat, bread, vegetables in broth, and wine. Eating utensils were basic: knives and spoons, but forks were rare. Most food was eaten with hands, tearing meat from bones and dipping bread in sauces. Conversation during supper often turned to politics and military matters. Medieval Europe existed in a near constant state of tension. Wars between kingdoms, disputes between nobles, and conflicts with the church created an atmosphere where military service might be required at any moment. When a knight's lord called him to war, he was obligated to go. That was the oath he'd sworn at his knighting ceremony, sometimes decades earlier. These military obligations were specific. Knights typically owed 40 days of military service per year, fully equipped with armor, weapons, and horses. Some knights paid scutage, essentially a fee to avoid fighting, but this wasn't always accepted. The threat of being called to war hung over every knight, influencing decisions about finances, family, and estate management. After supper came more administrative work. Letters needed responses. A neighboring lord might propose a marriage alliance. Another might request military support. Tournament invitations arrived and required answers. Literacy among knights varied. Wealthier knights from established families often could read and write, while those from humbler backgrounds might rely on clerks or priests. For literate knights, evening hours meant working by candlelight, drafting responses, and managing correspondence. This political maneuvering was crucial. A knight's position in the feudal hierarchy depended partly on birth, but also on maintaining good relationships with other nobles. Marriage alliances strengthened family positions. Military cooperation built networks of mutual support. Tournament participation maintained a knight's reputation and provided opportunities to display skill and wealth. All of this required careful attention and diplomatic skill. By midnight, our knight would finally retire to his chamber, exhausted not from heroic deeds, but from the grinding work of estate management. The next day would bring more of the same: disputes to settle, lands to inspect, training to maintain, and endless administrative tasks. This was knighthood stripped of its romantic veneer. Knights were soldiers, certainly, and when wars erupted, they fought in brutal, terrifying battles. but most of their time was spent as landlords, judges, and administrators. They managed agricultural production, collected taxes and rents, maintained infrastructure, and kept the peace in their territories. The armor was real, the military training was real, and the violence when it came was very real. But the day-to-day existence was far more mundane than the legends suggest. The medieval knight wasn't a superhero or a fantasy hero. He was a member of the military aristocracy doing a job that combined violence, administration, and politics in roughly equal measure. Understanding this reality doesn't diminish the historical importance of knights. It actually makes their role in medieval society clearer. They were the middle managers of feudalism, the people who made the system function on a local level, for better or worse. So that's the reality. Not quite the heroic fantasy we see in movies, but arguably more interesting. Drop a comment if there's another historical profession you want to see stripped of its Hollywood polish. More myth-busting videos are coming, so subscribe if you want to see how people really lived throughout history.